All right. Hi, and welcome to Following the Child, a free webinar where we're going to just unpack what it really means to follow the child. Um, this is becoming a more popular phrase in parenting, and I think a lot of families feel pressure that following the child means letting your kid do whatever they want. But actually, Maria Montessori coined this term in the early 1900s, and it's a key aspect of the Montessori philosophy. And so I want to just talk a little bit about what following the child means to me as a Montessori educator and as a parent who has now been raising children for over 20 years, but has also been homeschooling my kids since my daughter was in second grade and she's now in 10th grade. So we've had quite a journey of all different ages and all different learning levels. But at the core of all of that has been this concept of following the child. And so for me, really, what that means is developing a partnership with my child so that a lot of our day is spent in child centered activity and focused in our cooperation and partnership around how the day unfolds and what are the kinds of things that we do. Um, with our schedule, with our time, with our energy, with our passion and kind of how we fold that into what we're learning and and what activities we're choosing to do, or even down to like what chores we do or what dinners we make. So to start, part of the concept of following the child also goes hand in hand with what I've started to tell people is that our family embraces learning as a lifestyle and not actually as a schedule. So a lot of people ask me when I start homeschooling, when I stop homeschooling, when does the school day begin? When does the school year end? Um, but for us, it's all day, all the time, every season. We're always learning, and it doesn't end because your child's graduated from high school or because they've graduated from college or because you've reached a certain age. All of us are lifelong learners, and the more we can model that for our children, the more they have permission to embrace their intrinsic nature of their desire to learn. And and so that also, I think, brings up another important point of following the child, because it's not just about practicing child-led activities or curriculum. It's also about modeling. What are you modeling? How are you setting an example for what it looks like to follow your own interests, to follow your own passions, to learn, um, to be a lifelong learner, and to do a lot of side by side or parallel learning and activities. So a lot of the times when my kids and I are engaging in something, um, I set myself up with opportunities to learn about that as well. And we might do that right next to each other, or I might take my own time to learn and then come back and say, wow, did you know? Uh, do you know this whole, interesting world exists in that particular subject you're interested in? Let's explore it together. So, um, those are some of the just foundational concepts that I think tie into all of the little pieces of the structure that I'm going to teach you today. That is what I consider following the child. So, whether you're here in person or whether you are watching the recording of this or watching it on YouTube, I hope that you will ask questions. You can put them in the comments. You can email them directly to me at anna@annahouse.com, or you can openly ask them now during this session, either out loud or in the chat, because I think that these concepts unfold over time and also unfold through our own curiosity. And embracing curiosity is, again, another key component of following the child. Um, I am going to include a handout with this training. So when I'm sharing my screen, I will be showing the handout here. in this training. But I'm also going, if you have registered for this, I will email you a copy of this handout as a PDF that you can print out and fill out and use to take your own notes. Or I encourage you right now to just get out a piece of paper and a pen so that you can take notes while we're going through this, because a lot of it is asking questions and getting curious, making observations, and following your own sort of breadcrumb trail of of interests towards something that will be unique to you and your child, or you and the child that you might be interacting with or spending the day with. So I'm gonna start us off with looking at the handout and looking at the first piece, the first element of following the child. Here we go. So what do I mean when I say follow the child? I'm going to break it down into 3 simple steps to help you follow your child and begin the journey to a more connected and trusting relationship. And so I want you to brainstorm answers to these questions to create your own unique blueprint. The first question I have for you is, what is one of your child's current interests? Right? What is your child interested in? What are they curious about right now? What do you notice they're doing repetitively over and over again? So here's some questions, some more prompts, things to think about. What do they like to talk about? What do they play with often? What do they ask questions about? And what do they notice or point to? What are their curiosities, right? So one of my examples and a story that I like to tell is my son, who is now 23 years old.
Wow, wow.
um, and this was when he was a toddler. And I remember he would be sitting in the stroller, and it was like he'd make this little gesture to his ear, like, oh, I hear something. And it was not something I noticed, but he could hear it. And sure enough, we'd hear this, zh, 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 and he'd start saying, ball, ball. And he even knew the sign for ball, and he'd start signing, ball, ball. Um, he was so passionate about basketball. And he could hear a ball, like he knew when we were getting close to the park and someone was playing basketball, he would hear it and he would start, right, pointing and listening and getting really excited. And then we would get to the park, and, I thought we were there to climb on the play structures and go on the slide and do the swing. But I mean, this kid would sometimes not even move from the stroller. We'd get there and there'd be, adults or older kids on the basketball court playing basketball, and he would just want to watch. He would just want to watch. And, get so excited and pointing at everything. So this was even, before the point that he could even tell me I love basketball. I want to play basketball. But it was such an interest of his and such a curiosity of his. So that's where I took my own opportunity to observe. So this first section is really all about observation. It's all about observation and patience, and really sitting sitting in that curiosity of, what is my child's current interest? So um this became a really like consistent interest of his for maybe the first 10 years of his life. And a kind of fun side note is that just today he said, oh great, my ESPN, um it's like a, you know premium membership or something like that, like, just got renewed. I'm so excited. And we're not a huge sports family. We don't have ESPN as part of our regular cable package. But that's something that he is still really interested in, and he's interested enough that um he now has his own subscription so that he can watch all the different games, and all kinds of different sports, not just basketball. But even as a like preteen, I think one time I caught him up really late at night and he was sneaking listening to ESPN radio uh, in his bed. So these kinds of interests, they can be just a momentary interest or they can be lifelong interests that continue over the course of a child's life. So once you've identified that interest and you're really like, okay, yes, they are curious about it, they are interested in it, maybe even passionate about it, the next step is asking yourself, how can I create engaging opportunities for my child to explore this interest? Right? So some things to think about here are, what do you already have that is connected to this theme or interest? You might just have things around the house that are already connected to this. Um, and or what can you collect that would help develop that interest? Or where could you go to see more of that or to connect with others that share that same interest? So again, I started realizing frequenting basketball courts was a really great thing for us to do, right? Especially on those days where I was like, I don't know, I'm tired. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this super active kid. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna go park us in front of the basketball court. We could spend hours there. Like I feel confident we're gonna have a great day. Um, but also at home, how did I set that up at home for him? So in those toddler years, we already had a lot of balls because that was something, he was already really interested in. So I decided to set up in the living room. Actually, I didn't want my living room to be overrun with toys, but I actually just put a basket. So it wasn't a basketball hoop, but it was just a small basket that I had that was, looked nice in my living room with a ball in the living room so that he could be out there, mimicking what he saw on the court and, working to throw it in the basket. And sometimes I would hold it up for him so he could, try to dunk it. And so it was a way that we could set up opportunities to keep practicing, um, more some of those skills, but also something that kept him really engaged. Then we found, oh my gosh, there was basketball themed, all kinds of things. I remember we had one of those, it was like, and these are kind of an old toy, but it was like filled with water and you push the buttons and the little ball like goes
Oh
flying
yeah.
up in the water. And it had a couple of like little hoops that looked like a basketball court. And that was in the car. He would play with that, it was great. And then we did eventually get a basketball hoop in his room, a little plastic, kid size one. Then we got a basketball hoop outside. Then we had, and obviously as he got older, we had bigger and bigger basketball hoops everywhere. And I remember actually at one point we moved out to Arizona and we bought a real like nice professional, maybe not professional, but a really nice, basketball hoop that was weighted and everything that could go in the driveway. And then we put that thing in the moving van when we moved to Vermont. And we dragged that thing all the way back across the country because it was such an important part of our lives. And that was when he was about 11 years old. So, yeah, this kind of theme carried with us, and that's why I chose this particular example because this really is a theme that continued to carry across a lot of different um, ages and interests. And again, sometimes you're just finding one interest that might only last a month or two, or even a week. And that's okay. Like diving deep into an interest, collecting things, um, they don't always have to be things that you've bought. It could be sometimes like borrowing something, and I'm going to get into that into the next section, like borrowing things from the library or you know, finding a gym or a place that might have access to something like that. Um, so so let's just recap. So we have done some observing, we have discovered an interest, and then we've started to figure out how to create engaging opportunities for that, for exploration of that interest. And then the third step is how can you connect additional learning opportunities to this interest? And this is where, again, you can take all of the pieces and kind of put it together, and weave it together with a lot of different subject matter. So it doesn't have to be that basketball is only about gym class. right? And so as a homeschooler, that is a place where we've had the opportunity to then really, dig into these interests in a lot of different ways. And I have some other examples, but to follow this basketball example for now, um, so here's some other things to think about. What educational subjects naturally connect to this interest? Are there books about this interest that you can find at the library, both picture books and informational books? Is there a history of this interest to explore together? And also, can we make observations and do journaling about this interest? So with basketball, and this was actually before we were technically homeschooling. He was still engaging with the public school, but I've always also thought of education going beyond, even when my children are attending the public school, education goes beyond the hours they spend in the school building. And so much of that is about how am I setting them up for success? How, in what ways are we continuing that passion for lifelong learning? Learning is a lifestyle, regardless of the hours that they're at school. And so, for my son, again, this was in first grade. Um, he was he was a late bloomer, I will say. Obviously, very interested in gross motor skills, very active, very physical, but sitting and reading and writing in the classroom quietly was not a very successful um, was not very successful for him. And by the middle of first grade, his teacher finally was like, "We're really concerned. He's not reading at the level we would like him to be. He's kind of falling behind the other students in his class, and I don't know what to do." And he was already starting to be pulled out of the classroom to get special, one-on-one help for reading, and he hated it. It was awful. And this is where, again, we're kind of connecting all the dots. So I took a moment to just think, like, who is my kid? What is he interested in? And how can I tie that into this aspect of his learning? Like, learning to read is really a critical step. And it's took me a long time to find my own passion for learning, but I mean, for reading in particular, honestly. And one of the things that kind of reminded me of myself was that he basically said, like, the books are boring, right? And I remembered that, like, oh, when I finally found my passion for reading, wasn't the actual, like, it wasn't the actual reading that was exciting to me. It was what I was reading that was exciting to me, right? It, like, spoke to me. It made me feel something. And so this is when, drawing that parallel to basketball, and I talked to his teacher about it, and the light bulb went off for her, the light bulb went off for me. And we just, I brought books home. She put books in the classroom, all about basketball. So suddenly it was just a sports theme. We just did all sports, all sports books. And it really is. Montessori actually calls this moment of intrinsic learning an explosion into reading. So it's not so much about the phonetics or about, all of the rote memory ways we learn to read. It really is this moment where there's a click that happens, and that passion is ignited, and then the words just kind of like magically make sense. It's sort of one of those moments that you just can't explain. And some kids have it really early. Like my daughter, she learned to read really young. And for others, it takes a long time. I honestly don't think I had my explosion into reading until I was a sophomore in high school. And that's a whole nother journey I could share about at another webinar. But for my son, it was about halfway through first grade when he finally got his hands on a book about basketball. And then it was like, bing. um, and for the next, probably at least the next 5 years into sixth grade, or seventh grade, that those were the books he gravitated for. And we found some great young adult authors that write books about sports and about kids, playing sports and having all that whole hero's journey arc that happens um, you know, when you're reading a good book. And they were all took place on the football field or on the basketball court. um, and yeah, so again, like finding those opportunities to weave in their interest. Um, my other example here, specific to my son, is that when we were homeschooling in high school, his interest then was surfing. And so this one was really great because it really does tie in a lot of different subject matters. Um, and I did a talk a couple of weeks ago, which a number of people who registered for this training were part of, where we were talking about unschooling. And I'm not someone who was ever brave enough to say that I unschool my kids. But now that I am, sitting in this opportunity to really look back retrospectively and observe my own philosophy and style, I would put it in that category. At the time, I called it a project-based curriculum, is what we called it. And so that's again this concept of following the child. So at first, when we were homeschooling, especially for high school, I thought, well, we've got to have a curriculum. I bought a curriculum from a homeschool listserv where it broke down every subject, like here's the math book, here's the history book, here's the literature you're supposed to read, here's every subject was kind of, and each subject had different, they were all about different things. So, in some ways, that kind of learning is pretty scattered. It also put a lot of pressure on us, and we did a lot of arguing, and it wasn't fun. So we kind of abandoned that quite quickly, actually, um, in our journey towards finding what worked for us. And then I embraced this idea of project-based curriculum. And this is where this concept, especially this third piece here, really took um, it really took character. It took shape for us. And so again, this was now my son was in 10th grade, and he had done so many sports all the way up through high school. And his interest was clearly more in sports that were about individual performance, not so much sports that were about team, like a team effort. Like he wasn't very interested in soccer. He preferred sports like baseball, where it is a team, but it actually is about how you're performing in your position, in your personal position, and the skills you need to do that position well. And then we noticed he loved sports like golf and skateboarding and snowboarding, and a lot of sports that really involved you're really more competing against yourself and your own personal best and trying to do better. And then he found surfing, and that became a real love and a passion of his in 10th grade. And so by 11th grade, we set up, actually, I didn't set anything up. It kind of all just unfolded. He found a mentor who was a local surfboard shaper and repair, and working at the repair shop for a local company here in Vermont that that sells paddle boards and repairs paddle boards. And he was able to get a job there helping support, repairing dings in the boards. And then this mentor said, hey, you could build your own surfboard. And he started doing research, and he started reading books, and he started learning about how you could build a surfboard out of wood. So he decided to build an 8-foot surfboard out of cedar, and he had this mentor support him. And through this project, he started studying trigonometry. And it was such an in-depth practice in math, and a lot of it was through over YouTube. A lot of it was from this mentor. I didn't know the technical math he was using to determine the exact curve of how the board would be shaped. He then also studied woodworking because he had to buy the right wood. He had to glue all the pieces together. He had to shave them down. He had to learn so much about just how to do the actual physical labor of building it. He then also decided it might be a good business. So he started a whole business model. What would it look like to buy all the supplies? And then how much time would it take to shape it? And how much would he have to sell it for in order to gain a profit? He then read a number of biographies about incredible professional surfers, that then found him when he finally decided he really wanted to take some surf lessons. It turned out so much of surfing actually is about physics. So much of surfing has to do with also weather patterns, the shape of the floor of the ocean floor, the way the break comes, whether it's a point break or a like I don't even know all the terms, but I learned a lot. Obviously, like these are things that I don't have a degree in any of this, but I learned a lot because he was learning a lot and he was so passionate about it and telling stories about it. And so suddenly every subject that he needed um, was covered through this passion for surfing. And he really took some deep dives into the history of surfing, which then took him to learning about all kinds of places around the world, looking at how the you know Pacific the Pacific Asian islands have such a long history of respect for the ocean and surfing, and it just goes on and on and on. So those are some examples with my son, and I love to share examples in order to really pull apart these concepts. Um, so so here we are following the child, learning together, unfolding through interests and passions. I want to share one more example. I've been talking a lot, but right now, I am focused more on my daughter, who's a really, really different learner than my son and has really different interests. So, like I said, she learned to read early. She wants to sit in quiet, reading and writing all the time. That's what she likes, actually. Um, and this year, she decided that she really wanted to challenge herself with reading in particular and wanted to really dive in deep on some subjects around literature. And so the what she decided was she wants to study women authors. So she's looking at females in literature and female authors. Um, and that took her in two different directions. So the first was she discovered Jane Eyre and literature from the 1800s, and that just so as you can imagine, there's rich history there, and so that's also taken us on a path of all kinds of really great movies, down all kinds of interests in history and some really great uh, literature. And then it went in another direction where she discovered that a lot of women authors write science fiction or dystopian novels, which is another interest of hers. So we went to the library, and this was one of my favorite moments because the librarian was so thrilled when my child asked for the book, The Left Hand of Darkness. And I don't remember the author's name right now, which is terrible. But the librarian, one of our favorite librarians, she said, "Oh, that's my favorite author. She's an early, female author who's written so many. I mean, the section of all of her books was huge. There's so many novels that she wrote. But this one in particular, when the librarian found it and brought it to us, she said, I am so excited to be handing you this book right now. It was so sweet. And it's nothing I would have considered. But to watch the librarian and my daughter make that connection is just another piece I wanted to share because I think one of the things that we can also sometimes get into assuming is that when we allow our children to kind of follow their interests, or when we're homeschooling our children, that there may be a lack of socialization, or like how will we make sure they're getting, they're connecting with community members or different things like that. And so in both of my examples, my children have found mentors with similar interests as theirs. And so now, my daughter's going into the library regularly to report back to this librarian about the book, and then they talk about the book and what book will she read next, um looking at some of the like newer, younger authors, and then looking back in history of like who are some of the first female authors. And it's really exciting to see our children kind of make these connections. And again, it doesn't have to be just you leading this path for your child. So I would love to take a pause just in me talking and see if there's any questions, and also to say that one of the things that I offer is one-on-one support in this. So if you have questions, if you're not here live and you want to put questions in the comments or email me a question at anna@annahouse.com, we can connect one-on-one about your questions. And I also offer family coaching. And in my one-on-one coaching sessions, we actually go through this worksheet together and flesh out some of the details of how can you really make this come to life for you and your family.
Hi, Anna. That was wonderful. You are very engaging. You do a great job, and you're obviously passionate and very knowledgeable. I was going to, when you were at number two, I was going to say books, because that, and then there you were with number three, the whole connection, because reading to me is key. It's the window to everything. I was so thrilled to see. Wonderful, great presentation. I did take a couple of notes. You know where Eric lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the top 10 surfing beaches in
I
the
know.
world. Okay.
I know. We really want to visit him.
So I think, your son would be so thrilled to be down there. And then I was going to say, um, I think this was great. And I'm thinking that you have another, opportunity. I really would like to help you, build your, practice. I'm going to call it your practice, your
Yeah.
passion. Grandparents,
Yes.
not just parents, but grandparents, because I'm thinking about all the things that,
That would be
and
terrific.
so
And I
I'm gonna,
was thinking about grandparents, and I'd love to even maybe do something specific for grandparents, but I've been thinking about how to fold that in, because even whether it's grandparents, even, aunts and uncles, I've basically said, like, anyone who passes a child in the street, like, you don't have
yes,
to have
yes,
your own
yes,
children. Like,
yes, yes.
we it should all be child centered and focused. And one of the things that is interesting, even in the community, when we're out, when we're out in public places, um, I encourage my kids to, order their own food or walk up to the coffee shop counter. And
I'm very impressed. I think you're doing a great job, and I think you have valuable information and, just, ideas for parents.
so, so for my daughter this year, we are practicing an unschooled model, which is that she is actually taking classes at the school, but at her own pace and based on her own interest. And it,
Really?
yeah, and so
How
this
did you do that? How did you do that?
well, it unfolded really interestingly. So she started back at the public school for ninth grade, and she did ninth and 10th grade at the public school. Um, and as last year was kind of wrapping up, and she was talking with her guidance counselor about what classes she wanted to take, especially thinking ahead to what schools she wants to go to, um, she had struggled a little bit at the end of last year and had decided to drop two classes, one of them being her math class, because she was really not connecting with the math teacher. We convinced her to stay in the English class because she had an A plus, but she wanted to drop that too because it was so boring and she wasn't being challenged at all. And so we met with the guidance counselor, and I started saying, hey, we really want she's really interested in being more challenged next year. In particular, she is really interested in art and in literature. And though that's where we want to focus. And the guidance counselor said, oh yeah, that's a great idea, that's a great idea, but she doesn't have enough math credits. And I was like, yeah, I know, we can work on making sure we wrap things up with math. So then I said, well, she's really interested in maybe taking some college level courses. And then the guidance said, the guidance teacher said, great, how about some college level math classes? And I was like, no, 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 that's not, I feel like you're not
You're
actually
not
listening
getting it.
to
You're
us.
not getting it.
You're, um, and so, she kind of kept saying like, yeah, 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 yeah. And then the guidance counselor had signed her up for it. It was clear she hadn't listened to us at all. And it was really frustrating.
That's
So
what they do. I tell stories from way back. Yeah.
yeah, it was awful. So it was interesting because I felt like it took us like almost 2 months to recover because it was like so shocking. It felt very like I don't know, it just didn't feel
Makes
good.
no
And
sense. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, in some ways my daughter was just like, I give up. I give up. I don't even want to try. Never mind. Forget it. And it took us a little while till I remembered some of our other resources, and I reached out to a woman who had supported us, really did a great job of kind of being able to say, okay, so this whole project, this whole surfing project, you get a credit for trigonometry, you get a credit for physics, you get a credit. So really like fleshing out the different subjects. So I called her up and I started talking to her and I said, I can't figure out how to customize this school year without just totally pulling her out of the public school system. But she actually really enjoys going in. She has a couple of teachers she really wants to continue with. In particular, she's studying German. She loves the German teacher. She loves the art teacher who actually specifically created a new advanced placement art class. A couple of other kids having such a being so skilled and having such an intense interest in art and knowing that they wanted to go to art schools. And so she had developed an AP art class. And those two classes in particular kept really drawn to the school. So this woman, she said, well, did you know that in Vermont, if you're registered with the home study program, children can take as many elective classes at the public school as they want. It's like part of what's accessible. And
Really?
what the
Yeah.
guidance counselor had told us when we had pushed back about the schedule was, well, she just can't take that many electives. So I said, wait, there's a workaround here. So we registered through the home study program, um, and then we signed up for all the classes she wanted. So now she's taking German and AP art, and then she made two connections with classes that are part of her interest, which I mentioned, which is she's taking Dystopia and Modern Society, which is a literature class that compares dystopian novels and science fiction writing with current events and like helps the kids kind of make those parallels for like what are people writing about, and even though it seems like it might be placed in the future, how might it actually compare to what's happening now. And then the other class she's taking that she's
The math.
really
Yeah. What did they do about the math? Did she? I'm
well,
sorry, I
yeah.
interrupted.
So the other class she's taking at school is Women in U.S. History, so she's really excited about that. So then for math and science, we're actually utilizing a tutor type model. So we're working with a local tutoring company that she's actually done a little bit of work with in the past, and so we'll actually be covering algebra and geometry and chemistry all through her interest in art. And so one of the classes she just recently, and actually she did one of these with her grandmother too, which is called it's an art style called pouring. And it's where they have to like mix the chemicals together. So it's a lot of calculating, it's a lot of chemistry. You mix different colors, and you mix different paints, and then you create a specific texture. So when you pour the paint on the canvas, it makes these incredibly beautiful designs. And so we're kind of taking that route
Oh, that's great. And the
to
school
do.
was okay with all this.
They don't get a choice because we're registered with the home study program.
How do
So
you do that? You register for the home study. How does that?
yeah, so in Vermont, it's different state by state. You have to register in your state, and I don't know the process everywhere in the country,
So
but
how did you get into this home study?
yeah. So in Vermont, it's through the Agency of Education, and it's a department within the department of uh, the education department in the state, and they have a pretty simple, honestly, application process in which they have those core curriculum areas. They're like, literature, math, science, health, gym, physical education. Um, I can't remember. I think there's
And
only
how do you
five. There's only
qualify?
five subjects.
How do you qualify to be in that program? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, you just fill out the application. So you do have to, again, this woman that I called where I was like, we want to do the electives, but then how do we fill in the other gaps? She helped me just like find the language to just say, like, we're going to, we're going to do an in-depth study of chemistry through, studying glazes, and we listed a whole bunch of different things. So she's going to do a pottery class and study glazing, and so she helped me kind of like list the things. I also Googled a couple of subjects. So I was like, what do 11th graders need to know for X, Y, and Z subject? And then I just kind of filled in the blanks. They don't even require that you write complete
I
sentences.
was
It can
gonna
be like a
ask you.
bulleted list. It can say like for books, she's going to read this book, this book, this book, this book. Um, so you have to tell them kind of like at least a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit of what you think
So,
you'll study. But then at the end of the year, if you study other things, it's okay. Um,
are these classes all done through the high school then,
there's
or
no classes, no. Mm-mm.
so she just shows like a certificate or something of completion
Yeah.
of a course of
So
study?
So the application's pretty simple. They just want to see that you have you have some ideas of what you're going to learn for each of the subjects, so you can kind of like hit the minimum course of study. That's what they call it, the minimum course of study application. And then you have 9 months basically. You go through the school year, and in June, then that's the point where then you um, and it's interesting because it's actually kind of they do it all in one process. So at the end June, in order for her to apply for 12th grade, we'll have to show that she made considerable progress and finished 11th grade in some way. And there's two different ways they'll accept your like proof. And so one is a portfolio. So you can just create a portfolio of like anything she did, any writing she did, any art she did, you like people create these big binders and they just like put all the different work and they separate it by subject. We do not do the portfolio style. Although she does always collect a lot of samples of her work. The second way you do it is you have a licensed teacher do an evaluation. And that's what we do. So my unique constellation of the training that I've done as an educator, as well as a lot of the work that I've done, as a parent myself, and then so my experience, my training, as well as just my passion and kind of a knack for this puts me in a great position to support others, and I'm really excited to offer that. Um, and even if it is just kind of thinking through like what is the process, like doing a little research and figuring out how do you then one of the things is like how do you take the structure of the process that exists and how do you make it work for you. So at first I thought I was really overwhelmed by the idea of like applying with the state and then letting them like tell me if I'm good enough to homeschool my kids or something. And then I was like, oh, this is really easy, actually. um, and so, there's,
If you've given birth, you can do anything.
yeah. So, yeah, I would be really excited to support other people, and again, making it work for the kid, I think is the most important. And for I think my daughter is the same. It was just she's so creative, she's so passionate, she's so smart. And unfortunately, early on in school, by first grade, she was saying, I'm dumb. And I was like, why would you say that? And it was just because she was not getting that feedback through doing worksheets. Like every time she did a worksheet, it
Fair,
just wasn't satisfying. She was like,
fair. Eric until he got to graduate school. He thought he was dumb. Yeah, isn't that sad though? It's
Yeah.
taking so much potential away from a child and the world when
All right, so thank you so much for watching this webinar on following the child. I hope it was helpful, informative. I hope you've got your curiosity cap on and you can continue to brainstorm and observe and follow your child's interest to learn more about them, more about their interests, and maybe learn more about something you never knew about before. There'll be lots of opportunities to continue to follow your child. And there'll also be a lot of opportunities to continue to learn more, as this webinar is part of a suite of webinars that I offer under the Roots to Grow, Wings to Fly curriculum. And there is a full 5-module course on my website that you can purchase to get yourself started. And I will continue to offer these one-offs that'll get deep into one aspect of the curriculum so that you can keep, learning more, aligning more, setting your child up for success and independence, happiness and joy, and finding that life that you're longing to live. So thanks again, and we will be in touch. All right.
great job. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.